Today, Chief Swisher utilizes his education, training, and experiences to lead the Rochester Fire Marshal's Office and manage the administrative division of the Rochester Fire Department. So please welcome Vance Swisher.
We'll turn that off. Can everybody hear me okay? If not, I talk quite loud, so it should be easy. I appreciate everybody coming out tonight and then also giving me the opportunity to talk about the Rochester Fire Department. I'm very passionate about our department, the service we provide the community, and where we're going to be going in the future. A couple things I want to talk about real quick. I am very, very laid back. So if you have a question, don't worry, just raise your hand. We'll talk about it right then. My presentation is really kind of set up just to kind of give you some education about where the Rochester Fire Department has been, where we are today, and where we see ourselves going forward as the community continues to grow. So obviously there could be questions throughout the, sorry about the pages, we should be good now for a little while, throughout the night. So, okay, three areas that I want to talk about is influences of Rochester Fire Department's past, where the department is today, and what does the future hold. You know, one thing we should note is that the Rochester Fire Department and the Rochester community as a whole has always been influenced by tremendous amounts of growth. From even in the early 1900s, the community of Rochester has seen tremendous amount of growth. So what we're looking at both in our past, currently what we're dealing with, and even into the future, this is not something unusual for us. Not only the Rochester Fire Department, but the community as a whole is used to this growth that we're seeing and that we're talking about into the future. The struggles with infrastructure, the finances associated with it, staffing for public positions, and the general conversations regarding the long-term vision we face today are the exact same things that our predecessors saw before us. Both city council members, city administrators, fire chiefs, police chiefs, and other public workers. One thing I want to make sure that we understand is for us to know where we're going, we also need to know where we've been. A lot of what's happened in the Rochester Fire Department influences the way we do operations today, and then also how we're going to be doing those operations in the future. And I'd like to take some time to explain some of that history, explain how we've gotten to where we're at today, and then also how that'll be moving forward as the community continues to grow and the Rochester Fire Department continues to grow. A little bit about the Rochester Fire Department, just so you have a better understanding of what we do, what our vision is for our piece of the pie, or what services we provide to the community. First thing I want to point out is our mission statement. The Rochester Fire Department mission statement is to compassionately solve problems that affect life and property. It's relatively generic, but it has a very strong meaning for us. What that means for us is when someone calls 911, that call is transferred to the fire department. We do everything in our power to make sure we help that individual. It can be from going to your home to help lift someone up that's fallen and unable to get up on their own, to helping with a flood where a basement's flooded or something like that. You call the Rochester Fire Department, our goal is to compassionately solve problems that you present to us. And we'll do everything in our power to make sure we do that. We have a vision for the way we provide service. And our vision is that we pledge to be progressive and evolve with the ever-changing community that we serve. So once again, from what we've seen in the early 1900s to today to what we see in the future, Rochester has continued to evolve, and the Rochester Fire Department has to evolve with that community change also. It can be the way that we provide services. It can be the response profiles. There are a lot of different things that have to evolve. And we'll talk about some of the changes the department has done over time and how we've evolved to meet the needs of the community today. And then also we'll talk about what we see as the needs potentially going forward. Each of our members of the department are asked to enact a certain set of values. We hold ourselves to these values. Every member of the department is held to these values. First of all, our staff is dedicated. We're dedicated to the community, we're dedicated to the individuals we serve, and we're dedicated to our department. We're here to serve the public. That is the only reason we exist. We're not here to serve the Rochester Fire Department. We're not here to serve the City Council. We're here to serve the public. So when you call and ask for something, our obligation is to come out and do the best ability we can to meet those needs. Our staff are reliable. So when you call, we're going to be there. Just no question about it. Integrity. Our staff has a high level of integrity. This is highly important for the fire department because the fire department has access to people's homes way above and beyond what a law enforcement officer has. We can enter anybody's home without a search warrant, basically with due circumstances that we think an emergency is going there. So there has to be a high level of integrity of our staff that the public trusts us, so that we do not ever endanger that. We hold ourselves to that. No holds barred, no questions. No matter what, that is one of our paramount things that we do. Of course, bravery. Our staff is brave, though I think bravery gets to be misconstrued. We understand the risk that we have to take sometimes. It's calculated. We do it safely, but there is a level of bravery associated with it. We have pride in the department. We have pride in our community. And last but not least, we have leadership. Without leadership, we can't develop our department to be sustainable. So the people coming in behind us need leadership today so they can fill those leadership roles in the future. So leaders today have the obligation to continue to lead the department. I want to start out with the influences of RFD's past. We'll talk quite a bit about the history of the Rochester Fire Department, how it became in existence, some of the issues that we've had as we've developed, some of the growing pains that we've dealt with, and how we've moved forward with some of those. So the Sioux tribe was primarily displaced from this area probably about a decade before the Minnesota Territory was established. So the Sioux tribe lived in this general area where we are standing now. They had campfires along Bear Creek and stuff like that. But when the Sioux were here, fire was mainly used for cooking. Sometimes they used fire to clean some of the land and stuff like that. But it had very small, very specific requirements for their life, what they did with the land, the way they lived, and the way their traditions evolved. It wasn't until we started seeing European settlers come into the area that we saw a larger hazard associated with fires. So it's everything from what we brought in from the traditional cooking and stuff like that, but the other threats that came into it, the way we heated our homes, the way that we used blacksmith shops, the way that we used fire as a whole created more of a hazard when Europeans came into the area. While fire was a useful tool for the Rochester area settlers, they clearly understood the distinct nature and destructive nature of fire and the impact that could have on them. In these times, a fire could wipe out an entire community with no problem. We had very little fire protection. Our homes, our structures were generally made of wood, quite easily to ignite and lose a block, a whole community and stuff like that. So the nature of fire was well understood by our forefathers when they settled this area. Many New Englanders, young Germans, and Norwegians entered this territory were accustomed to strong voluntary firefighting traditions started by Ben Franklin, and the romantic myth of the American firefighter was well established in them. And this led to a desire to have a fire department in the city of Rochester. And we'll talk about that a little bit more as we go on. But that strong desire, that understanding of what could be from the east, where they all came from, was brought here as they settled in this area. The growth in this area was encouraged by promoters, by newspapers, by people getting off the parades of prairie schooners or chuck wagons going by in the area, following the Dubuque Trail. The climate here, the natural beauty, the clean living in this area brought people from all over the country to this area. So it was a well-known area, well promoted that people could be here. The same year that Rochester was incorporated, the Rochester Post-Bulletin recorded 3 dwelling fires. So Rochester was incorporated in 1858. That same year, the Rochester Post, which I'm assuming came into the Rochester Post-Bulletin or somehow it's tied in there somehow, recorded 3 chimney fires. So even as the city was being established, we saw fires in our community. The next year, Mandeville lost the Egerton flour mill, and then also Pleasant Grove lost a dwelling. So fire is not uncommon in our area as we developed and we grew in the area. Now, understand that during this time, there was no organized firefighting force, but mainly fires were dealt with by impromptu bucket brigades. So people would grab a bucket, they'd find a water source, and they'd try to bring buckets to the fire. And generally, they weren't trying to put the fire out that was there. They were trying to verify or trying to do the best they could to keep the fire from spreading to other buildings or other dwellings or stuff like that. So the term of firefighting that we see today really wasn't there. It was really just trying to contain the fire and manage it the best they could so it would not go a block or the entire city. Another thing should be noted is newspapers, as we developed in this area, gave prominent displays of weekly advertisements for fire insurance. So once again, fire was a huge concern for the area, and it was promoted in newspapers that fire insurance was available. Now, obviously, it was probably quite expensive for the time. I'm sure a few dollars a month, which would have been significant back then, but it was available. Questions regarding the community's ability to address the fire problem were raised after a hotel fire on College Street. And College Street used to be 4th Street Southwest. Used to be the name of it. So it's 4th Street Southwest, used to be called College Street. So there was a large hotel fire there. The hotel was consumed in 15 minutes. So from the time it was determined to the time it was completed was 15 minutes. There was a lot of concern about the public, wondering how can we deal with this? How can we make sure we don't have a conflagration like we see in Boston, in Chicago, and stuff like that here in Rochester? We're a much smaller city, but the same opportunity existed. So the questions were asked. Although the residents considered the need for fire protection, a greater issue occurred at this time, the Civil War. So obviously we lost a lot of our male occupants of the area that were going off and fighting this. The public itself was entrenched trying to figure out how to deal with this, how to adjust with this, leaving back many juvenile males to help take care of the farms, the work, everything that was left. So the fire problem was kind of swept aside as the country itself as a whole was dealing with the Civil War. And here in Rochester, we were dealing with that also, as many of our male occupants were gone and serving either the North or the South. Another thing happened in 1864, a large impact to the economic drive that is Rochester. Rochester's expansion slowed for a more practical reason in May of 1864. A fire in the Alexandria Goldsworthy planing and sawmill burned the business to the ground. The sawmill went in the ground within 30 minutes. From the time it started till the time it was done was 30 minutes. The bigger issue here was the fact this was the only sawmill in the general area that provided wood to Rochester. Wood was paramount to the economic development of Rochester. So once we lost the sawmill, we also lost the ability for Rochester to continue to grow until that sawmill was replaced. And this is an interesting fact because the same occurrence happens today when we see a fire. Most of the time when we see a fire in a business, 9 times out of 10, that business will not reopen again. And if you think about it, the business burns down. The customer base that they had goes to other locations, to alternate suppliers that are there. So for that business to take the time to rebuild, get back there, even if they want to, and try to bring that customer base back, is very challenging. From an insurance standpoint, once again, 9 times out of 10, if a business has a large fire that puts them down for any amount of time, the business will not be there in a year or will not come back into being anytime soon. So once again, with this impact of fire, the known impact it had on the community, the question was raised again, why not organize a fire department in town? The question was raised in an article by the Rochester City Post, it used to be called the Rochester Post, now it's the Rochester City Post, 2 weeks after the fire. The article went on to discuss the need for a fire engine, expressed concerns about a conflagration that could happen downtown, much as we've seen in larger communities out east. And also what it would take if just one windy day would happen. So a small fire, obviously in Rochester we have a significant amount of wind. Even back in the 1800s, apparently we still had a lot of wind here. Their concern was, what would happen if we had a good, strong wind and a fire? How quickly would that spread? How would we be able to control that without a fire department? The paper promoted the need for 1 or 2 good fire engines and active young men to work them. So that's what they were asking for in the editorial paper. Several months later, another editorial was noted in the paper, noting the existence to check the progress of the devouring, or to note that no progress had been done to check the devouring opportunity that fire could occur in town and actually wipe out the entire town. The article cited indifference amid general prosperity of the community and again exhorted city officials to provide extinguishment methods to prevent a calamity within the town. Once again, the same thing happens today. Most people never anticipate they're going to need the fire department, and that's a good thing. They never anticipate they're going to need an ambulance. They never anticipate they're going to need the police department. But it's not until it's too late, generally, that we see that the problem occurs, and we're trying to pick up the aftermath. And here, the paper was just asking for the city to take a step forward and try to limit how big that aftermath would be. Again, in 1865, an editorial restated the need for fire protection and provided opinions to the city council members. It proposed the council to protect Rochester from the fate of similar cities. A quote in there was, Rochester is just too valuable for a fire conflagration to take us down. So the community, once again, or at least the editorials, were noting the need for a fire department. If not a fire engine, they said, at least a hook and ladder company. If not a hook and ladder company, then a good supply of buckets in an accessible location where people can grab them. So they weren't asking for too much. They were asking for a few $100s combined with a systematic, organized action that could save thousands of dollars of property in the event of an extensive fire. So once again, they were looking at options, as all communities have to look at options. The fire protection for any community is an option for that community. So what fits Rochester is not going to fit St. Paul. What fits St. Paul is not going to fit Stewartville, Minnesota. So they were looking for options to try to determine what was the best fit for this community for fire protection. So everything from having a brand new fancy pumper to having buckets available in some type of systematic way to get water to the fire. In 1866, officials estimated the population of Rochester to be around 4,000. What's interesting in that is just 6 years earlier, the census recorded 2,600. So in 6 years, the town gained 1,400 occupants within 6 years. Doesn't sound like a lot compared to today's standard, but if you think about the time period, to add 1,400 occupants to a town of 2,200 or 2,400 is a significant increase in population just in 6 years. So once again, Rochester has always had big-time economic development and developers. Most newcomers settle in more accessible river towns such as St. Paul, Stillwater, other towns like that. But growth can be attributed to the promoters marketing the healthy living environment here in Rochester, the river mills that we had in the area that processed wheat, cigar-making industry, and then even the horse racing industry. I don't know much about the horse racing industry around here, but apparently it was enough it was noted in the book. So it must have been something pretty interesting to see. In 1866, the city had 6 churches, had a county courthouse, several schools, I'm sure we had a lot of squirrels, several schools. It had the Winona St. Peter Railroad, 2 banks, 6 blacksmith shops, and about 30 to 40 other businesses. So we were a big town in 1866. One thing about the town, though, that people noticed was the wood frame structures were very vulnerable to rapid moving fire, starting generally by heating and cooking stoves. Many early fire accounts emphasized the great speed at which these fires would grow, and they also transfer from structure to structure. If we think about it, we're talking about rough sawn wood that's very dry, that's got probably a lot of openings in it and stuff like that. It's almost a perfect fuel package. So, and to go from one building to another is not unheard of. Citizens in the area and across the country feared the easy transfer of fire from one building to another building and the potential for a total destruction of the community. In January 1866, 4 chimney fires were reported that night. 2 were contained in the chimney. 1 was extinguished with minor damage to the home, and the embers from another chimney nearly ignited a shed pile of combustibles near Payne's hardware store. On January 22nd of 1866, the Common Council finally acted and established the Rochester Fire Department. So they approved a hook and ladder and bucket company, the necessary apparatus, and fixtures to protect the business district. So once again, at the time, they weren't worried about your single-family dwellings around the community. They were worried about the downtown business district because that was the economic engine that drove the community and kept the community going. The council authorized local businessmen to recruit 50 members for the company. So we had 1866, we had 50 members for our hook and ladder company. The plan included fire prevention. This was a tremendous thing that will be seen throughout, or a thread that will be seen throughout the Rochester Fire Department. But in our inception in 1866, fire prevention was a huge component. The council provided a fire warden to each of the 3 wardens of the community. And each fire warden was responsible for inspecting the chimneys, the fixtures, and basically any other thing that could cause accidental fires in the community. So we had fire marshals, we call them fire marshals today, going around in 1866 trying to identify areas of opportunity that we could reduce our fire problem in the city of Rochester. In the spring of 1866, the council added an ordinance banning wooden construction from the Central Business District. Once again, this is the first fire code in the city of Rochester, looking at ways that we can mitigate the opportunity for fires to grow and to expand in the city of Rochester. A simple ordinance saying we couldn't have wood in downtown area was the first fire code. So we had not only our fire response, we had our fire marshals trying to prevent fires, and we had legislative action that looked at ways to mitigate fire in Rochester. So back there in 1866, we were looking at multiple ways to mitigate the fire problem in our community, much like we do today, that we'll talk about a little bit more. In May of 1866, the city's first firefighting vehicle was completed by Lockheed's blacksmith shop. It was hand-drawn, it was a hand-drawn hook and ladder, carrying several ground ladders, hooks for stripping off roofing material and pulling down buildings, and buckets. We had no firefighting capability. The concept back then was that the building that was on fire, we would try to pull it to the ground so it wouldn't go anywhere else. We'd take the contents out and stuff like that. But we had truly no method to extinguish a fire. So the hook and ladder company's job was to get the contents out of the building as fast as possible, try to tear it down, and try to keep it from spreading. So they would lose the building of fire, but they would try to protect everything around it. Post-fire critiques of the effectiveness of the Rochester Hook and Ladder Company were not flattering. The guys didn't do a good job, so unfortunately. And within the year of the Hook and Ladder Company's organization, the Common Council disbanded it. So once again, Rochester Fire Department was established in 1866, and within 1867, we were disbanded. Not really a good start for us, is it? Okay, we'll move forward a couple years to 1870. In 1870, there were a number of large fires in Rochester. And these fires took down not just single buildings, but multiple areas of buildings, 2-3 buildings for each of the fires, and had a large impact on the economic development and economic growth of the city of Rochester. The business community reluctantly requested the council to purchase a fire engine and reestablish the fire department. So they had seen what could happen with the Hook and Ladder Company and determined they needed a little bit more of an offensive opportunity to try to put a fire out. And they'd seen what had happened without the fire department being there. So with council's approval, they purchased a fire engine, a building to store it in, and then also a stationary fire pump. So we had a mobile fire pump that could be pulled throughout town. We had a stationary fire pump that could pump right there at the river. And then we had a building to put the fire truck into. The first true fire department that we could see here. A couple innovative things that they did was the fire station was built right over the old Spilsbank Mill race, which is, remember the race is the waterway that comes out after the water wheel turns. The fire station was built right over that race. So what they could do is if they didn't have to, they can open up a hatch in the floor, they can drop the suction out of the pump right out of the fire station. So if the fire was close enough to the fire station, they would never even have to take the engine out of the fire station. They could pump right out of there. And any structure within 1,000 feet of that fire station, that's what they did. So many a times they were pumping right there in the fire station without ever pulling the fire engine out of the station. 2 underground cisterns were constructed and filled with river water to extend the pumping or the range of the fire pumping operations. So once again, they built cisterns that they could move the fire engine to somewhere else in the community, draft out of that cistern, and fight a fire somewhere else. They didn't have the fire hydrants or the water supply system that we see today, so they were being innovative and looking for ways to mitigate the fire problem again. Once again, using ingenuity and looking for different ways to minimize that hazard at an effective cost. Later on, over the next couple of years, several additional 35,000-gallon cisterns were added throughout the city to improve the fire protection district so that more water was available throughout the community. This new engine and the firehouse focused the city's interest on fire protection. And in December of 1870, the department finally became a viable organization with 30 members on the engine company, supported by 3 hose companies with 15 members each. So we had a total of 75 members on the fire department in 1870. 30 on the hose company because they're going to be dragging the hose around, basically doing the firefighting. 15 on each hose company, which would drag the people-driven cart with all the hose on it to the fire, lay the hose out, and stuff like that. Yes?
The fire truck, it was steam driven?
Yes, so the first fire truck, this is called, not Solly. Anyway, I can't remember the name of it also. It actually had a name. It was not steam, so it was people pulled, but it was steam powered. So what they would do is they would have a tinder box in there ready to go. They would light the tinder box with coal, get it stoked up, so it would take a few minutes to get it stoked up and going, bring the steam engine up to power, and the steam engine is what actually would run the piston pump within there.
So it's ready within minutes?
Within probably 5 to 10 minutes, yep. So a lot of times they would keep a small fire going in there, just kind of sitting in there, and all they have to do is stoke it and get it really up and going. Wouldn't take them long to do it. So, yeah, it's an interesting concept. I started my career in Rochester, or Cedar Rapids, Iowa. We had a muster for our 150th down there when I was still employed down there, and actually they had a steam engine come down there. It's actually a steam tractor. So we see the steam tractors around and stuff like that. Same concept, just it's running a piston pump, the same thing. So, but they would keep a small fire in there and have it ready to go where they can get it up and running pretty fast. So within probably, I'm not sure if it's 5-10 minutes to get it up and running, but they get it up and running at a decent speed somehow. Okay, in 1883, I'm sure everybody who's lived in Rochester very long remembers the tornado, or at least the story of the tornado, not the tornado. The interesting thing about the 1883 tornado is there's not a lot said. Actually, there's nothing said about the Rochester Fire Department. So if we look at the Rochester Fire Department back in the 1883, its sole responsibility was fighting fires. So it doesn't do a lot of things that we do today, where we would go out, look for people in collapsed structures, get basement water out and stuff like that. Its only responsibility was for a fire. So unless there was a fire, the fire department didn't go out. Now, the reality is, I'm sure many of the members of the Rochester Fire Department help neighbors out, help them, their other members out and stuff like that. But there's just nothing really said about the fire department because there's nothing related to the fire department where they would actually have an official call out for the volunteer community. The only thing about the tornado that came out of it was it really refocused the community on safety. Not only fire safety, but safety overall. So this tragedy that came out of the tornado coming through Rochester, multiple good things came out of it. Mayo Clinic came out of it. And a safety council and a safety vision for the community came out of it. Studies for a water distribution system began in 1885. And in 1886, council leased the first private water system in Rochester. It had 8 miles of pipe, 120 hydrants. The priority for the system was firefighting service only. Water or clean water to the community was secondary. So it wasn't designed to support water, clean drinking water for people. It was designed to be used for firefighting capabilities. Clean water was a secondary thought or an afterthought when they put the system in. The new system was installed within the year and included a 225,000-gallon storage tank. So now not only did we have a piping system and hydrants, we had an elevated storage tank that provided pressure or constant pressure to the water system without any mechanical means. So the elevated storage facility was put on a hill higher than everything else, which created a natural pressure for the water system. With the installation of the hydrant system, the original steam engine, the stationary fire pump, and the house that housed the fire engine were all sold. So the funds that were used to the funds that were raised from this sale was noted to go to an automatic alarm system for better notification of the fire department. It should also be noted that for the next 25 years, the fire department didn't have a fire engine. When they fought a fire, they would fight a fire strictly from the hydrant and the pressure provided by the elevated storage tank. They had no mechanical way to increase pressure or move water other than the hydrant system that was installed throughout the community.
How long period was that?
How long? 25 years. So that would have gone from 1886 to 1912. So that we didn't have a fire engine. We had hose carts, which only carried fire hose. We had hook and ladder companies that had the ladders and the hooks on it and some buckets, but we had no mechanical pump. So the stationary pump and the fire engine or the portable pump were all sold and non-existent in Rochester for 25 years. Money. It was just an economical choice at the time. At the time, they thought, and were very effective with it, they could fight the fires they were seeing in Rochester with just the static pressure from the hydrant system. So there was no true need or driving need for them to have a fire pump. So the system provided an adequate amount of volume of water and pressure for them to be able to put the fires out. So very foreign to me, would never even think about trying to do it today, but they were very successful at it.
Were people careless about fire, like they have wooden frame houses?
Yeah, so I'm not sure if it'd be careless. The opportunity for fire was just greater back then. You know, everything we had was combustible. So our buildings were structured out of combustible, unless we went with brick. You know, we had some ordinances that said you had to build with brick inside the downtown area, but everything we had was combustible. There was no gypsum board. There was no steel, very little steel. It was very expensive to have that stuff because it would have to be trucked in from somewhere. So most of our structures and most of our items were made out of combustible materials from products that we found around the general area.
They had plenty of trees. So
Plenty of trees, exactly. So it made it very efficient for them to develop and design stuff. Just created some problems with it. So once again, like we said, we sold our fire engine, we sold the station, and we sold the stationary fire pump in the effort to raise funds for an automatic alarm system. However, with everything going on during that time, there was a lot of economic issues going on. There was a lot of turmoil in the community regarding funding and stuff like that. The funds were not used for the fire alarm system. So that occurred in 1886. It wasn't until 1900 that the city approved a contract for 12 fire alarm boxes and 2 electrical circuits to transmit an alarm from the box to the fire stations.
they still have them around.
They don't. So we'll talk about it real quick. So what we're looking at here is the Gamewell fire alarm system. So Gamewell was a well-known, well-established fire alarm system within out east. So if everybody remembers these, they were around Rochester for numerous years. You would pull the box, and the box would start making a clicking noise. You just click, and every now and then you hear a click. What it was doing was sending a signal back to the 2 fire stations. So every time you heard a click inside that box, it would send an electrical signal back to the fire station. Within the fire station, 2 things would happen. The bell would go dong, and there would be a puncher that would punch a hole. And depending on how many bell holes there were, told the firemen where the box was. So if the box is box 11, you would hear a dong, break, dong, long break, go back to dong, break, and the firemen would go to the board, see where box 11 was, and that's where they respond to, hoping that the citizen was still there to tell them where the emergency was. And it wasn't just some kid running around pulling a box, which happened quite a bit, my understanding. So when activated, each box transmitted a signal with a unique number that we talked about to not only the headquarters station, but also the north fire station. And the number corresponded to a specific corner or a location. So Mayo Clinic would have its own box. So inside Mayo Clinic, a security office or the front door, they could actually pull it there and they knew they were going to the Mayo Clinic. While the Gamewell system was a large success, the use of hydrants alone revealed some shortcomings. We had problems specifically with inadequate pressure on high ground and fires needing long hose stretches. So as the city continued to develop out, we started developing up on some of the ridges. We start getting where we're having sprawl, we're having to stretch hoses from a long distance from the hydrants. The existing water system wasn't adequate to get pressure and volume either through the friction loss of the hose or to the elevation difference. So we started seeing, as we developed more and more, the inability of the hydrant system to provide the volume and the pressure that the firefighters needed to put the fires out. And just in case anybody's asking, the game well system was good until, I think, early 80s here in Rochester. So you used to see them on the corners. You can actually find them still in some old buildings. Some of the high-rise buildings in town still have the game wall system in the basement. It's inactive. It doesn't do anything anymore, but the guts are still there and everything like that. So it was quite an ingenious system. It was almost bulletproof. The City of Rochester Fire Department had people specifically assigned to the game well system to maintain that and keep it up, and they did an excellent job on it. Sometimes I think we should go back to the basics and do that again.
Something about this hydrant, you know, in England, the mailboxes were red. I don't know if they still are. A lot of English people would confuse that.
Oh, were they? I did not know that. So you're saying that a lot of mailboxes in England for English people are red colored, so they could confuse the fire alarm box as a mailbox, pull the handle down on accident.
And then kids would play with it. And,
Yeah, no, kids would play with it all the time. Firemen were not overly happy when that happened. Okay, in the mid-1920s and 1930s, local fire loss figures were minimal compared to other cities in Minnesota. The trend of low local fire loss figures continues through today. So even back in the 1800s, all the way through today, the Rochester city has had low fire losses when you compare to communities our size. I'm not sure if it's the education we have here. Definitely the firefighters that we've had in the past, firefighters we have today are exceptional professionals at their job and have done a great job at their job, the fire codes and stuff like that. But Rochester has historically always had a low occurrence of fire when we compare it against communities of our size across the country. One thing that happened in the 1930s was Mayor J.J. Wright was appointed to the League of Minnesota Cities to lead a charge in the insurance, to change the insurance base rates to get away from just rating the fire department and the alarm system, but to also look at the water supply system, building laws, prevention ordinances, and structural conditions. They were trying to look at a way to reduce the base insurance rates in Rochester because of our low occurrence of fire. They were trying to say we should be giving a benefit for all the efforts that our firefighters have done, all the efforts our community has done by enacting ordinances and stuff like that, and the community went forward to the state to try to get that done. Unfortunately, they weren't successful. He tried for many, many years to get some type of credit for our low occurrence in Rochester, but was never able to. The interesting thing about the fire department rating scale is it still exists today. It's much different than what we saw back then, but it's called the Insurance Service Office rating scale. And today, the Rochester maintains a level 3. And we maintain a level 3 mostly because of what was happening with our predecessors. The firefighters we had on the department back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s set us up for success to make sure that we were able to provide this level of service and to our community. Along with that, as long as we keep an ISO rating 3, it also reduces our insurance rates, not only for residential properties, but the commercial properties. So if we go from a level 3 to a level 4, there's going to be an increase both in residential and commercial property insurance rates. More of an impact on the residential side than on the commercial side than the residential side, but it does have an impact. So a lot of work that my forefathers in the department did has led us to be able to provide not only a very safe community, but keep insurance rates very low. And a lot of that's what Mayor Ritter did, the actions he was trying to do. He was just trying to do it many generations too early. This fire service and the insurance agencies have come around to that concept they were looking at nowadays. Another thing the fire department did in the 20s and 30s was they conducted daily alley and commercial inspections. They cleaned up hazards associated that they found at the owner's expense. They serviced fire extinguishers without charging, and then they did everything they could to reduce the opportunity for fire to occur in the community. So not only were they firefighters where they go out and fight the fire, they were proactive fire marshals. They were going out there in the community trying to identify ways to reduce the opportunity for fire, much like we do today. Fire prevention has been a core value of the Rochester Fire Department from its inception. We talked about in 1866 that 3 fire wardens were assigned to each of the wards to go and look at chimneys, look at stoves, look at opportunities for fire. That was instilled in us from the beginning, and if you look throughout the history of the Rochester Fire Department, it has continued to be a thread in what we do and the service we provide the community. Fire Chief Cudmore, Ginther, Everett, and Mertz were all strong proponents of fire prevention activities. Each of them took different avenues to try to make the community safer. Chief Everett was really concerned about tanks, fuel tanks in the community associated with the railroads and stuff like that, looking at secondary containment and stuff like that. Cudmore is just generally public fire safety oriented, going out, doing the alley checks, looking at hotels, motels, and stuff like that. Mertz, we'll talk about Mertz in a minute, had a strong influence on not only the fire department you see today, but a lot of the community buildings that you see today. Okay, fire prevention. We talked about early on in 1866, the fire department or the city ordinance required non-combustible buildings or would not allow wooden buildings in the downtown area. That was our first really fire ordinance. The first true fire code in the city of Rochester occurred in the mid-1960s. Several circumstances combined to greatly impact the future of the protection strategies of Rochester. Huge growth potential, building size and height were tremendously increasing. The need for city leaders to manage public safety or public service cost, and they required a new look of how the Rochester Fire Department was going to provide service to the community. Chief Mertz implemented a number of strategies that improved the effectiveness and efficiency of the fire department. SCBAs, fire zone response maps, fire code map or fire code cards. So if you called with your address, they pulled a card up. They knew what apparatus were closest to send them and stuff like that. But one of the most effective and long-term impacts that he had was the development and implementation of the city's first comprehensive fire code. Chief Mertz did a lot of different things. A lot of people like Chief Mertz. Chief Mertz also did a lot of things that people got frustrated about, I'm sure, as every fire chief does. But he had a lasting impact on this community with his vision for fire code, fire prevention, and how he can manage the size of the fire department by doing a number of different things. The new fire code had 2 important features. First and foremost, it created a separate fire prevention bureau within the fire department. Prior to this time, firefighters, fire captains would go out and do the fire prevention activities. What Chief Mertz did was create a fire prevention bureau that had a specific goal and specific mission to go out and do code enforcement. And this was at a time that we saw the fire service taking on more and more responsibilities and having to expect our firefighters to do more and more. So we were looking at, to be the most efficient and effective method, how can we make sure that not only are we providing the emergency services to the community, but how can we do that prevention side also? And Chief Mertz chose to create a fire prevention bureau. The other thing that the code did was it called for automatic sprinklers in high-rise buildings, new commercial construction that exceeded 2,500 square feet. Most of the business community supported this code and could see the benefits of lower insurance rate. However, there was a controversial requirement to sprinkler existing buildings in the community. Buildings are a tremendous hazard for firefighters because you have to go subgrade, you have to get down there with limited access both in and out, and as we all know, heat and smoke comes up. So as the firefighters go into the basement, they're having to fight that heat and smoke coming out. So it was controversial because it was an existing building requiring a retrofit for a sprinkler system in it. It did pass, but with a 3-year delay. So Chief Mertz was effective enough to get it passed, maybe not as soon as he would have wanted to, but today we can see the benefits of that sprinkler system in a lot of our long-term buildings in the base, long-term buildings in downtown Minnesota or Rochester that have basement sprinklers associated with it that protect not only the occupants but our firefighters when they go in. In July of 1968, the National Automatic Sprinkler and Fire Control Association featured the Rochester Plan in their advertisement or their literature of how to manage the growth of the community and manage the growth of the fire department. While the Mayo Clinic voluntarily complied with the new standards prior to their implementation, they saw the need for it. They knew what they were going to do long-term for their development. They chose the sprinkler stuff, both retrofit and new. The first structure that was totally sprinklered under the new code was the Apache Mall. So you can think when Apache Mall was built, That was a large building at the time. You know, today we look at it, it doesn't seem that massive, but when it was built back in the mid-70s, it was a humongous building, something that we didn't see a lot of, especially for a commercial building like that. The new era for RFD was underway. Rochester fire protection plans were now reliant on built-in protection systems and preventative code. This approach maintained a low fire insurance rate while keeping the department size at a minimum. And that's something that we have to understand is the actions of Chief Mertz back in the 70s had a direct impact on the size of the department we deal with today. So if you look at communities our size, with the number of residents we have, the amount of geographic space we have, generally they are much larger than us. We are a very small and compact firefighting force because of what Chief Mertz did with the automatic sprinkler systems in most of our commercial buildings. So most of our commercial buildings have fixed fire protection that will control the size of the fire. It's not going to put it out. We still need firefighters to come in and extinguish the fire, but it's going to minimize the size of that fire, allowing us to have an efficient and effective firefighting resource here in the town. So Chief Mertz, when he built the Fire Marshal's Office or the Fire Prevention Bureau, appointed Chief Smith to be the Bureau Chief or the Fire Marshal for the Fire Prevention Bureau. And throughout the rest of their careers, they pushed for the adoption of stronger protection measures throughout. So they continued through their whole career to promote more and more restrictive ordinances to mitigate the opportunity for fires. They used local incidents to identify local needs and move forward with changes to improve Rochester and help minimize the occurrence of fire in town. Early in the 1980s, the Rochester Fire Department became a member of the Southeast Minnesota Chemical Assessment Team. The department at the time was looking at ways to address the number of chemicals that we're seeing both at the IBM complex and other areas of our towns. And there were a number of battalion chiefs and captains that were instrumental in this department coming up to speed with those chemicals, how to respond to them, how to make sure they were stored appropriately, how to make sure not only our staff is the Rochester Fire Department were safe, but our community was safe. And their efforts and their long-term efforts allowed the department to become a member of the Southeast, or become a member of the Minnesota Hazmat Team. So even to today, the Rochester Fire Department protects the southeast portion of the state of Minnesota when it comes to hazmat calls. And it's all based on the actions and efforts that these battalion chiefs, these captains, took to make sure that the department and the community was ready, allowing us to easily move into that statewide team concept when it occurred. In 1998, the Rochester Fire Department began with EMT-based responses with fire apparatus. This was a collaborative effort between the City of Rochester, the Mayo Clinic, and Gold Cross, and has been the most significant change for emergency service response the department has seen since its inception. Up until this time, we did the hazmat. We've got capabilities for hazmat, but the biggest impact that we've seen on our capability to respond and our response numbers is using existing resources to respond to medical emergencies. So in collaboration with Gold Cross and Mayo Clinic. The next thing, the biggest change we saw after that was the structural collapse team. This occurred after September 11, 2001. We had the World Trade Center. There was a lot of state funding. There was a lot of federal funding that was the development of teams in each state to be able to respond to large structural collapses. And Rochester, once again, became a member of that statewide team and have the capabilities here. A couple of things that should be noted about the hazmat team and the structural collapse team is these funds are all state or federal level funds. So the capabilities that are provided by these teams would not be allowable or would not be something community most likely would have without that state level funding or that state level organization. So we're very fortunate that we've been able to get those capabilities here and move forward with it. Okay, where's RFD to today? So RFD today, we have 97 firefighters. We have 1 fire mechanic that's responsible for all our fire apparatus. 3 fire marshals that are assigned to provide fire prevention throughout the community. 1 training officer and 5 administrative positions. So myself, the chief, another deputy chief, a secretary, and an administrator. A little bit of the layout of the fire department. The fire department is broken into two distinct areas. There's my right-hand side, your left-hand side, is the emergency response aspect of it. The department is made up of 3 shifts. They are led by a battalion chief. The battalion chief is the shift supervisor, for lack of a better term. So they lead the shift. Then there are 7 captains, and each captain has a motor operator and a number of firefighters assigned to him. At any given day in Rochester, there are 25 firefighters at minimum on duty with 8 apparatus capable of responding. 6 engines and 2 ladder trucks are always fully staffed in town and able to respond around. On the other side, which is my side of the house, is all the boring stuff. HR, payroll, all that paper pushing stuff. So that was my side of it. So we have 5 fire stations in town. So I got a picture on the bottom. This is the fire station that was down on the end of South Broadway, right in the middle of the road. It's sat there for a long time. This is a picture of station, that's station 3. Or new station 2, I should update that, put new station 2 in there. So.
The clock from there is still, they haven't got, I think it's a mail parcel.
Yep. No, so the clock, what he's talking about is the clock from there has been moved to a number of different locations. So it was over at the U.S. Bank building right behind Station 1. Then it set out in front of the Mayo Civic Center before we had the renovation. Now the clock is in storage. But if you go to our website, there's actually a movement right now to get the clock reinstalled at the fire station location there on South Broadway. So we have a donor that's going to donate $100,000, and we're working to raise $100,000 to get the clock reinstalled there at the...
You need a person who knows how to do it.
Yes, and luckily we had a couple of guys that are going to teach the younger guys how to do it, because unfortunately the guys that have taken care of the clock long term are getting up there in age. We want to make sure we want to transfer that knowledge to the younger generation. Not me, younger than me, because I won't be here long enough. So, okay, a quick little picture of where we're at for fire stations. So geographic distribution is an important aspect for us. So right here, I can't go all the way down. Right here in the middle of town is fire station number 1. It's the central station. It has 2 engine companies and a ladder company there. Station 5 is down here by Shopko South. Station 3 is out here by a little bit past the country club, by the Mayo parking lot on 2nd Street Southwest. Station 4 is up here on 41st Street. Everybody recall, we used to have a station here at Silver Lake. That one has been decommissioned. So we've moved out of there, and now we're up here on Viola Road and East Circle Drive. So it allows us to have the biggest distribution of assets while still remaining the opportunity to respond to 90% of our calls within 4 minutes or less. So that's what we try to do, is we look at timing stuff, placing apparatus, that we have the best opportunity to respond to your call in 4 minutes or less. Just some information on the community. Of course, this is always changing. The fire department protects a land area of 130 square miles. The city's got about 53 to 54 square miles. The rural area that we protect is about another 76 to 77 square miles. We protect a population of approximately 121,000, 106 to 110 inside town, and 15 to 20,000 outside of town. And these are residents. These are not people that we have coming into Mayo Clinic. These are not the people that we have coming from Casson and stuff like that into town. Yes, ma'am. So that's actually a great question. So the Rochester Fire Department is obligated to provide fire protection within the city limits of Rochester. That's what we're obligated to. Outside the city limits of Rochester, it depends on the political jurisdiction on what they want to do. Most of the time we're talking about townships. So the townships look and see who they want to provide fire protection for it. So once again, as we talked about earlier, fire protection of a political entity, be it a city, a township, a county, is really a very unique and very personal item. So each township makes a choice on who they want to have provide fire protection to it, looking at the pros and cons. Travel distance, insurance rates, cost, and those type of things.
What do you charge a rural area?
I don't even know. There's a formula. I should know that off the top of my head, but it's there's a formula based on building evaluation, not property evaluation. They look at building evaluation, and I believe it's population, and they come up with some type of agreement, so, on how much they pay there. So, did that answer your question? Just a little upside of what we do for run volume. This is 2014, 2015 numbers. 2016 is on pace to be over 10,000. But generally, we're running it's going up about 3 to 4% a year. So it's going up, just steadily going up. And it's everything. A lot of times we say, is it medical response related? It's not. All the numbers are just going up. As the community gets larger, the needs get more impact, we see an increase. So in 2015, we had 237 fires. This could be anything from a structure fire to a vehicle fire to a field fire. We had 6,338 EMS calls that we went on. We had 117 hazmat, 51 rescue, 859 false alarms, and then 2,162 other calls. That could be pumping out a basement, saving ducks out of the drain, getting cats out of trees. It could be any of that type of stuff. So if you look there, 14 we did 9,107 calls, and 2015 we did 9,764, and we'll probably be over 10,000 this year. I generally get a couple of questions on fire causes in Rochester. Our cause for fires in Rochester is very similar to what we see across the state of Minnesota. Cooking is our leading cause. People are distracted today. People are always on their phone. They think they're going to walk away from the stove for a minute. They're gone 15 minutes, and they catch something on fire. Heating is our next leading cause. Open flames. Incendiary is still a problem with people starting things on fire on purpose. Appliances and electrical are tied with 8% each. So once again, if I can figure out a way to get people to pay attention when they're cooking, most likely we're going to have a lot of our problems taken care of. Just some of the services we provide today. We talked earlier that the fire department, when it started out, only provided fire service. They went to fires. That's not what it is today. As we talked about earlier, our mission and our vision for the department is to continually evolve to our community's needs, and that's what we've done. We obviously still provide fire suppression. If you've got a fire, we're your guys to come put it out. Guys and gals, I say guys, we're your people to come put it out. So we've got both female and male firefighters. You have an emergency medical situation, Gold Cross is going to be coming to help you out, but we're going to be there also. And we're usually first. Yep. So, we're there first usually because of geographic distribution. Our stations where they're located happen to be in a good location to get us for emergency medical. Now, once again, we do emergency medical as excess resources. So if we have a choice between going to a fire call and a medical call, we're going to the fire call because that is our primary mission. If we've got nothing going on, we're going to go to that medical call and just support Gold Cross and make sure we have that best opportunity for outcome. Vehicle extrications, rescues, hazardous materials, technical rescue, that's that structural collapse team. So if you get stuck in your house, you get stuck in a ditch or something like that, we'll come take you out. Fire investigations. Every fire in the city of Rochester is investigated, either by a fire marshal or the captain. Do fire code enforcement. So we have fire marshals that look at not only plan review, but also existing buildings and stuff like that. Emergency planning, public education, community projects, station tours, and of course, cats out of the tree. Okay, so the next question, kind of maybe one of the reasons why we're here tonight, is where's the future going for the city of Rochester, or the Rochester Fire Department? Yeah, I'm way off, so. Okay, DMC. It's going to have an impact on us all. But what I want to make sure people understand is DMC is nothing new for the city of Rochester. The growth rates that we're talking about in DMC are really the same growth rates that we've seen in this community for the last 15, 20 years. It's just a new way to package this growth, a new way to promote it, and a way to move forward with that growth. But the growth rate is no different than what we've seen in the past. When I started in 1999 in this town, we had 85,000 people. Walmart South was just being built, and there's nothing south of there. So over the last 17 years, the amount of growth we've seen is exactly what they're talking about in years. So it's manageable. It's nothing the community hasn't seen in the past, We just have to take our time to identify how we're going to address these new issues that come out of it. And some of the new issues the department's going to be dealing with, increased call for service. We're going to have both a geographic distribution problem as the city continues to grow out. We're going to have to look at relocating or adding fire stations. We're also going to have a population density issue. As we have more people in a tighter space, we have more calls for service, and we may have to add units to existing stations to be able to deal with the call load in that area. We're going to see increased congestion. So as we have more people coming into the community, be it we're going to go to a walk-friendly community, we're going to have cars, we're going to have a bike-friendly community, we're going to have congestion, which is going to have a direct impact in our response. The ability for us to get our equipment from the fire station to where it needs to be will be something that we'll be addressing as a fire department. Increased code inspection, development. The fire department is very integral in the entire development phase of Rochester. So we work with the fire marshal's office, works all the way from the point of planning and zoning where it's a bare lot. We have fire marshals working on that all the way to the point the building is raised. The Rochester Fire Department has an obligation in there somewhere for code enforcement, management, and make sure this public is safe. From basically for a building, from birth to its death, we have management and issues that we have to deal with. Of course, we're going to have to deal with the financial demands that are coming up with staffing, equipment, and facilities that are going to come along with the DMC growth. The thing I want to tell you is the fire department administration, though I can't tell you exactly what we're going to do because we don't know because it's going to be an impact, we have plans set in place to address all the potential issues. If we go to a community that's going to continue to grow outward, we've already identified locations for the next 5 fire stations so that we know if it goes out to the south, if it goes to the north, east, west, or wherever, we have a good idea where the next fire stations need to go. We have a plan if the city decides or as development increases that we go to a higher density, we have plans to add staff to existing fire stations to address increased call loads to those areas if the units that are there are unable to address those issues. We're looking at implementing different code strategies to minimize the effect of fires in the community, try to reduce that occurrence to maintain a small and effective firefighting force. So there are multitude of strategies that we're looking at implementing. The problem is I don't have an answer for you yet because I'm not sure exactly how DMC is going to play out. But as fire administration, what we're doing is we're looking at all the opportunities, trying to make sure we have all the bases covered, and we can move forward with whichever direction DMC goes and whatever impact that has on the Rochester Fire Department and providing your service to you guys. With that, I'd like to open it up for questions.
You didn't say anything about fires caused by lightning.
Oh, so fire caused by lightning. Let me see if I got it in there. Hang on. I did not. So fire caused by lightning is an other at 27%. Lightning itself is pretty low. So it's probably maybe 1-2%. It's not extremely high. In a year, we'll get maybe 5 lightning strikes. And of those lightning strikes that we're informed about, 2 or 3 of them actually start a fire in a structure.
It's mostly trees or buildings.
Did it?
Yeah, I heard stuff in the morning, the big boom, but I didn't know what it was.
Yep.
It was in the paper a few days ago.
Yep. Yep. In the trees, yeah. It does. Yeah, we get a lot of tree fires that way. So, the biggest threat with lightning is if your home has that corrugated stainless steel pipe, gas pipe, the yellow tubed gas pipe. Lightning is awful for that. It punches holes in that like Swiss cheese all the time. So, it happens.
Do you think you're supposed to put on your furnace to, I don't think I have.
Yep, so what they do now is they ground and bond it. So what we're talking about is if you have a newer house, you look at the yellow, it's a yellow gas pipe, corrugated, it's got plastic on it. It came out of Europe. Europe does not have the lightning potential that we have here. So what we find out here is the lightning strikes we have, when it comes into a house, it finds that gas pipe and it grounds itself out and just punches holes in it. Then we have a gas leak inside the house. So we get that about once a year. It's been around for 15, 20 years. Yeah, so it's not a huge hazard. You just have to know it's there. So if you smell gas, just know where your gas meter is so you can turn it off. Or if you smell gas, actually just call us. We'll be there in a heartbeat to address it.
Where do we find these pipes? We have a town home that's built in 1995, but
Yep.
I'm not familiar with
So go to your furnace. So if you look at your furnace, you're either going to have black iron or you're going to have this corrugated stainless steel, which will be, it'll look like it'll be a stainless steel pipe with a plastic cover over it. Generally, it's yellow.
If you don't have that, you need some kind of a ground wire or something.
You're supposed to ground it. Now, I'll tell you for a fact, my house isn't grounded with it because I don't believe the grounding works well enough, so it's not worth the hassle for me. So.
Should it be a copper pipe that's painted sprayed yellow?
Nope. So, no. So it's either you can have copper, you have black iron, or you have this corrugated. So, most likely you probably get corrugated. Take a look at it. It's a very low hazard. It's a hazard. So, other questions?
I would ask you what I should have done. This is when I was in Chicago working. I was in a skyscraper on about maybe 20th floor. And I was in an office working. I looked down maybe half a block away, and I noticed the water tower was starting to burst on top of the building. And I knew if all that water came down on the roof would cave in. So I called 911, and I was trying to explain to them where this building was. I didn't know what to tell them. I didn't have an address. I didn't have anything. What do you do? I mean, what should I have done in a situation like that?
Exactly what you did. So if you can get them to the general area, they'll find where the hazard is. So, yeah. So if you have a hazard, just call, get them in the general area. They will do everything they can between law enforcement and the fire department. They'll do what they can to find the hazard.
You know, they would have had to get the people out of that building because the old building, it would have been a chance.
Yep. Yes, ma'am.
In this February, there was a fire in the neighborhood, and very early on, there was a community service vehicle out there, directing traffic and such. What's the correlation with the fire department?
Yep. So what she asked was she had a fire in her neighborhood, and she saw a community service officer in her neighborhood doing traffic control. So what we do use is law enforcement helps us out a lot doing traffic control. So they may have either a police officer or a community service officer there doing traffic control. So what the police department generally tries to do is they want to try to keep their police officers open and available. So they'll have their community service officers come over and block traffic for us so people don't drive over our fire hoses and stuff like that.
Along where I live in the winter, the cars parked on both sides of the street. In my little car, I can barely get through there. What would you guys do in a case like that? Your fire trucks wouldn't be able to get to the middle of that.
So we try to find an alternate route first, or if we had no other choice, we just push the cars out of the way.
Kind of ram.
Yeah. The fire engine's going to push the car out. It's not going to, yeah. So my guys keep wanting big rubber bumpers on the front bumper. I keep telling them no because it just encourages them to do something I don't want them to. Very rarely do we have problems, even on very narrow streets. If you have an 8-foot wide area, our motor operators are generally good enough to sneak it in there. I mean, they're pretty good about getting it in there. So.
Would it be wise to, like, in some of those more narrow streets, just allow parking on one side of the street?
So there's actually a state fire code requirement for the minimum size of streets. It's supposed to be 20 feet in width. If you can have 20 feet in width, you can reduce it down on size, just like you're saying. So there are some older areas of town that were approved before the state fire code became in existence. So we do have some areas where we have those problems. We generally work with Public Works to identify those areas and then sign them off. So if you let me know where it's at, we can probably take care of it.
I'm just paranoid, but never, I'm not in the middle of the block, it wouldn't affect me.
Yep.
I'm thinking of all these other people that seem like you'd be able to get big trucks.
Yeah, so I used to live on 3rd Avenue Southwest, and same thing there. We had a very narrow street, people parking on both sides of the street. But the engineers are pretty good about getting their trucks up through there. In fact, 17 years, I don't know if anybody's ever had to push a car out of the way, really, to be honest with you. So they're very good. They're professional. They can get that truck in there where it belongs quite easily.
Chief, one of the pictures earlier, that's not with you. You don't have to back up,
Okay.
but it's the one where the fire hole is at the end of Broadway.
Yep.
The congestion on Broadway was, you couldn't hardly get through it. And you think of what the congestion was back then compared to what it is now.
Yes.
It was where you could park on the sides and parking in the middle of the street as well, too.
Yep. I think
It was really a precious picture to see how
yes.
that picture was taken.
Right there. There's one. This is, can't remember, this is like 1900s downtown. So, now granted, the fire trucks are a lot smaller back then, and we had horses pulling them or people pulling them. But, yeah. And we've been very fortunate in Rochester. We have very professional people. They're able to get these apparatus. I mean, they're big trucks. Get them in where they belong and stuff like that. We are very blessed to have a very good firefighting force today, and not only today, but the people we had in the past have passed the tradition and the skills on up to make sure that we can do it today even.
There was an article in the Wall Street Journal this morning on emergency services, and it was primarily medical, but Rochester came out on top.
Yep. Yeah, so one thing to know about Rochester community, Dr. White is a cardiologist, I think he's a cardiologist. Anyway, he's in charge of automatic defibrillators over at Mayo Clinic. Dr. White has brought a program to the city of Rochester a number of years ago, and that's why you see the police department, you see the fire department, and the ambulance going to medical calls, because we have the best save rate in Rochester across the entire country, only second to, I believe, Seattle. So if you have a cardiac situation, you want to either be in Rochester or Seattle for your best chance of survival. So, yes, sir.
Can you talk about maybe the support that, like the Red Cross or the Salvation Army gives you? Or
Yep. So Red Cross and Salvation Army do a tremendous job supporting us. Red Cross is probably the primary agency that we see on a regular basis. So anytime we have a fire where there is people going to be displaced for any amount of time, Red Cross comes in and provides lodging and then also clothing for those individuals. If we have a large incident, we're going to be there for an extended amount of time. Red Cross will bring food. Salvation Army would do the same thing. So they have cantinas they would bring out and feed our people while they're on scene and stuff like that. So they are a tremendous asset and collaborators with us to be able to provide public safety to the community, and then also provide opportunities for individuals that are impacted to be able to get back on their feet.
What is that building on South Broadway? When was it taken down?
God, now you have to ask me that. It was taken down, so when new Station 1 was built, that would have been, so it had been taken down like in 40s, 50s. It was built in the 20s, I think. So.
Like where Station 1 is now?
I think it was just a little bit south of there, down there by about just a little bit south, I believe.
Yeah, I remember when they parked the cars in the middle of Broadway.
Yep.
It's a wide street, and the cars were smaller now.
Yeah, I think they were small, exactly. All right. Yes, sir.
Have you had any large building fires the last several years?
You know, to be honest with you, we haven't. We've been, and that's, knock on wood real quick. We've been extremely fortunate in Rochester. You know, you look at our occurrence of fire, it's mainly in residential occupancies related to cooking or something like that, or some type of other issue. But most of our, go ahead.
I was thinking of the Miracle Mile.
Yep. So, and most of our commercial buildings now are sprinklered. So they have the automatic fire protection system in it that's protecting it. So what that has allowed us to do is maintain a very small and effective firefighting force, because most of our commercial buildings are capable of taking care of themselves. We come in and extinguish the fire, but it's not the Miracle Mile fire that we saw or stuff like that. Fortunately, we just don't see those. And a lot of that has come out of what Chief Mertz did, implementing the fire code that he did at the time, Chief Smith at the same time, getting that proactive work. I mean, they took, I'm sure, a lot of grief for what they did back then, but we're seeing benefits of it now and moving forward. So a lot of things that what was funny, I kind of digress for a minute, was the city ordinance in Rochester actually went to the Minnesota State Supreme Court and was kicked out for a couple of years. So because it was deemed that it was more restrictive than the building code, which they couldn't do at the time. What's funny about that, though, is 2 years later, the state fire marshal and the building code official at the state level came up with a optional fire code amendment that matched what Chief Mertz and what Ollie Mertz and Al Smith were doing locally. So it was pretty neat. And you look at the fire codes we have today, the thresholds are very similar to what Chief Mertz and Chief Smith were doing back in the 70s. So they were forerunners. I mean, they were very far ahead of what they were thinking for fire prevention. And then Chief Mertz, I mean, even on the emergency response side, things that he did to set the department up to be successful were incredible. So, go ahead.
do you have an opinion on the requirement for home sprinklers?
Yeah, I do. No, I'll tell you. I mean, so as everybody knows, I came up through the fire marshal's office. So I have residential sprinklers for me are a two-edged sword. When I built my house in Iowa, when I lived in Iowa, I put a sprinkler system into it. But I lived in a rural environment. The fire department, I was a member of the fire department, but I was in a very rural environment. Made a lot of sense for me there. I had small children. The concern I have with residential sprinklers isn't from the fact that they're effective and they're efficient, because they are. The problem is we have so much building stock without them. Do we get communities confused on what's got protection and what doesn't? Because a sprinkler system isn't like a fire alarm or smoke detector that you can just put back up in the room and you do it independently. It's an integral part of the structure. So where I struggle is, even if we implement residential sprinklers today, what is going to be the impact? Are we going to have a significant impact on our housing stock 10, 15, 20 years from now? And so I struggle with it. So do I think it's effective? Yeah. There's efficient and effective? Absolutely. Is it going to change the way we do stuff for the fire department? I don't think so. So I don't know if I answered your question well enough or not. I'd love to see them. The short answer is yes, I'd love to see them. But the fact is, it would not have the same impact of what Ollie Mertz did with fire codes and stuff like that. To be able to reduce or maintain the size of the fire department, I'm not sure we could do that with residential sprinklers quite yet. So.
What a non-destructive replacement for water, like Halon, or is that?
So in small compartments, it's very viable. So what we're seeing is, because of, like in a residential occupancy, it's not viable because you have to flood it, and you do have a decrease in oxygen. It's not enough where it'll kill you, but it could impair you. And then to make sure that the structure is tight enough to keep it in there long enough to extinguish the fire is where the struggle becomes. So we see halon in like computer rooms and stuff like that, but we have to do what's called a door test. So we actually do a leak test to make sure a concentration at a certain level can stay in there to extinguish the fire for a certain amount of time. So. Huh?
A window open and it's useless.
Yeah, window open and it's useless. Door open, it's useless. Drill a hole in the wall, enough holes, and it's useless. So. I knew you were going to ask me that. So I believe right now we have 6. Jean, Rebecca, 6. So we have a female captain, we have a female motor operator, and then the other 4 are firefighters. So. Yeah, days are gone. You know, the reality is it's not a male-dominated job. I mean, there are things that the biggest guy on the department can do very well, but a female does something different better. It's a team effort. I mean, it really is a team effort. So, you know, putting together big monster guys and a small guy or smaller person, so they have attributes of both, is actually the best. Until you have to drag the big guy out, and then you just, well, I love you, Bob, but... Other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Do you guys live there?
So, yep, so currently they do live there. And when I say they live there, they work a 24-hour shift. So they come to work at about 7 o'clock in the morning. Their shift starts at 8, and they will be there for 24 hours straight. So they're there for basically 1/3 of their life.
It went for like 2 or 3 days.
Nope. So there are different schedules. So our schedule in Rochester is they work a day, they take a day off, they work a day, they take a day off, they work a day, then they have 4 days off. So basically they work 9 days in a month. So.
Do you get a bed to sleep in?
No. No, they generally don't. So, you know, they'll make, what's interesting about it is, even if they don't go on a call, they don't get to sleep very much, because every call that goes out, everybody knows about it because they have the radios on and stuff like that. So it's not a restful sleep or something like that.
Can they cook food there?
Yep, they have a kitchen. So it's basically, you think of your home. They have a residential area that's like their home. They have a kitchen with a refrigerator. They have their own dorm room. They have a TV room that they buy the TV for. We have a workout facility for them so they can stay in some shape. So round is a shape, but we try to make sure they don't get round and stuff like that. But yeah, so they're there for basically 1/3 of their life.
Okay, what happens if they go in the bed and they lay down?
The fire alarm. So anytime there's a fire alarm anywhere in the city, there's bells and whistles that go off in the room.
So it'll wake them up anyway?
Yeah, all the lights come on. It makes a lot of noise. They very rarely do they sleep through it. So.
Why did you put every station for one?
Well, the station itself won't, but everybody carries a radio. So, and everybody's paranoid. If you miss a call, you will never live it down. So everybody's got radios on and stuff like that. So it's just because, and they just want to know what's going on too. So if there's a call close to their area and they need help, they want to make sure they understand what's going on. So.
Why are fire station stairways round?
Why are they round? We don't have any stairways round. We got,
No stairways?
We have one stairway, why is it round?
Yeah, they used to be round, weren't they?
No, not that I know of.
I heard there was a story to keep the horses from walking upstairs.
Now, that would actually probably be that'd probably be true, to be honest with you, so. We have a pole at Station 1, so it's the only station we still have a pole at, so. Now, one thing about the horses was, when we had horses in Rochester, they were extremely smart. They would hear the bells go off, or the game wheel system start clicking, they would get up and walk to their position to wait for the harnesses to come down on them. So I would not doubt the horses figured out they could go upstairs and get carrots or something like that. So,
Have Dalmatians chasing him?
so we have had Dalmatians in Rochester, and the Dalmatians were there to protect the horses at the fire or at the fire station, to keep people from, stealing the horses, and then also to lead the horses to where they're going. So, yep. Someone else had a question I missed. All right. I appreciate your questions. One thing to know, the Rochester Fire Department is your fire department. Don't ever hesitate to stop by a station. The staff would be happy to show